True indeed with you, Holy Circle Gaming. Thank you for rocking with your boy, and like always, definitely a privilege and an honor to do as such. Y'all see what we getting into, living room status, you know what that means, another top 5 breakdown. We're gonna throw this one out to my boy Lightskylar. We're gonna make sure this top 5 happens for him as I break down his particular top 5. Y'all miss me? I miss y'all too. So let's go ahead and get into it. Top 5 breakdown. Y'all see what that is, right? Grand Theft Auto. Lightskylar's first choice, Grand Theft Auto. Not even mad at you with having that pick, because I'm going to tell y'all right off top. Grand Theft Auto, pound for pound, probably the best franchise or the best game put together to date. Period, no question. And the reason why I say that is because it does everything right. It's very few things that this game does wrong. When it comes to gameplay mechanics, absolutely has that on lock. Storyline, fantastic. Sound, from the soundtrack to the sound effects, got that on lock. Driving mechanics in the game, whether you're doing a little motorcycle or a car or however way you're transporting, does that right too. It does everything that you could possibly want to do right in the game, and then they still find ways to expand upon it as well. Now, keep in mind, for all my old school gamers, y'all know when Grand Theft Auto first came out, it was top down, but the crazy thing about the top down version of Grand Theft Auto in its first iteration, it was still fun to play even then. Take away all the story elements and stuff, just the sheer fact of how Grand Theft Auto was comprised, even from a top-down point of view, was very great from a game structure point of view. It had great structure to this game, and they transitioned that little top-down structure to the third-person point of view, what we have now, and it's phenomenal what they do with Grand Theft Auto. For people really not to have Grand Theft Auto in its top 5 is really just kind of saying that they just prefer different styles of game as opposed to saying that Grand Theft Auto isn't a great game. You know, the one thing I'll give Grand Theft Auto and the squad from Rockstar an immense amount of credit for is strictly this. They were willing to take risk. They knew that they had a monster on their hands, especially when they came out with Grand Theft Auto 3. And they were willing to take risks, and they were willing to push the envelope as far as they could without going overboard. And even certain people would say that they did go overboard, but they really pushed the envelope in every way. Y'all wanted more story, they gave y'all more story. Y'all wanted it a little bit more gritty, they gave y'all more gritty. Y'all wanted to have the game be more fluid, it gave you fluidity. And the crazy thing about it was, they did all of this, for the most part, in a single player game. They gave you every single aspect that you wanted in a game in a single player point of view. And from that alone, just the single player experience that you get with Grand Theft Auto is off the charts. There is probably not another single player game that you could say that you're going to get that much reward from. The thing that you could say about Grand Theft Auto, true, it's not for kids. Yeah, the one thing that Rockstar embraced with Grand Theft Auto is they embraced that M-rated tag. They came in there saying, look, it's an M-rated game. They knew what they were getting into. They knew they were going to push the envelope. They knew they were going to involve the gunplay, the carjacking, the nudity, the strip club. They're going to involve all that. They knew what they were getting into from jump. And they pushed the envelope as far as they could without it teetering over so they couldn't sell games. They gave you basically everything that you wanted in the game without it going overboard so they would get their games yanked. That's the only thing that they had to do to kind of stop themselves, just literally to not get the games yanked off the shelves. But they gave y'all everything that y'all wanted in the game. Now, I preface that to say this, like I'm going to tell y'all from jump. There was way too many kids who play this game. There's way too many parents who don't understand what this game is. They didn't understand it from the beginning that it's an M-rated game and it's not for kids, because there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of scenes, there's a lot of gunplay that kids should not see, and the kids who are seeing it young think that it's cool now to actually try to imitate this in real life, and it's not cool. So y'all got to understand what this game entails. But with all that being said, as far as like the parental advisory that I have to kick out to y'all, this is a great game. There's nothing bad I can say about the game. Now, is it a game that I personally dive hours upon hours into? No, it's not for anything else. It's just I go in my modes when it comes to me playing Grand Theft Auto, but that's not negating the fact that it's a great game. It is every bit the game that you want it to be. And I think the most important thing that you could pull away from Grand Theft Auto is one thing, simply put. It made every single other game adjust to what they were doing. You know, to get a great story, you know, you were going to try to compete and get some of that Grand Theft Auto piece of the pie. You have to do something better than it. You have to come up with a better story. You have to come up with better gameplay. You have to come up with better driving mechanics. You have to come up with some sort of thing to try to separate these people from playing Grand Theft Auto, because Grand Theft Auto, pound for pound, I tell you, best game made so far. It's hard to get people to pull away from that game. It is a generational game, just like other games are. Like you will see Mario's a generational game. Grand Theft Auto is a generational game. You know, there's 5 iterations of it. It's been on anything from a PSP to a DS, all the way to your consoles and on PC. And it's great. And the other thing that it does well, as all that being said, as far as the single player campaign, it also gives you a great multiplayer, you know, experience too. They said, look, I gave you the best that I can with the single player campaign, and it's probably not much they could do with it from a single player point of view. And then they kind of re-upped on that and said, look, we're going to give y'all a great multiplayer experience too. Really took their time, really dialed it in right, and they actually got it to the point now in Grand Theft Auto 5 where their multiplayer's cooking just as good as their single players cooking. So what does that tell you? Every other game company's got to match up. Y'all gonna have to match up and figure out what you're gonna do to take out one of the juggernauts in the gaming field, and that is Grand Theft Auto. So Lightskylar, you putting this in your top 5, definitely a fantastic choice, because to me, it is definitely worthy of top 5 billing. Let's go ahead and get to the next one. Man, y'all see this game right here? Nuclear Strike. Now, when Lightskylar pulled this second game out of the mid, he really had to dig through some cartridges, some old school PS1 games to pull up this particular game out the rack. Now, am I big on Nuclear Strike like he's big on it? Nah, I can't say that, man. I've tried to, and I tried to wrap my head on things that could make this game fresh. And there's the crazy thing about it. There's some crazy fresh things about Nuclear Strike. But for me to even remotely consider this in my top 5, I don't know, man. And part of it's me. So let me kind of preface this. I'm not super huge on flying games. So if it's going to be a game that is a flying game, it would have to be something really, really dope, like, you know, Ace Combat or Microsoft Flight Sim, if I'm talking about flying games. But this wasn't even that type of flying game. I give it some kudos. Now, the one thing Nuclear Strike did, and I'll give it extreme kudos, is that it actually had a game that didn't involve planes, but involved a helicopter in particular. Now, that's dope. And for that to get that type of building to, you know, be built around a helicopter, that's fresh. I like that. Not mad at that concept at all. So, but I would personally say I would rather play an Afterburner and Ace Combat as opposed to Nuclear Strike, but I'm not mad at it. But you know what it really did, when I really kind of break this down, I'm really kind of evaluating this game, is that it was really an arcade game at its core, just really put for the consoles. But I felt that it would be better suited if it was actually with the flight sticks, like if they had like helicopter control, like yokes and stuff, or like a helicopter. I think it would be better suited for that in the arcade realm and get more people to buy into it that way, especially during this time when arcade games were actually still in its move, where it was actually people still going to the arcades, where you had your big old box like Afterburner, where you sat into the big old box and you actually kind of rotated around with the plane and stuff. They could have done something like that with Nuclear Strike, and I think it would have been better suited for it, because I think people would have probably gravitate more towards this game if it was in the arcade realm versus on the console realm, where I got a little bit of shine but not as much shine. You know what I compare a game like this to, and I was just thinking about it right now. The game that I compare Nuclear Strike to is a game like R-Type. if y'all played like R-Type, if y'all played like what's the other game? I can't think of the other game. It's a little night. I think it's called 1942 as well, where you actually take like a plane and it's arcadey, and you can play with 2 players, and you actually get the different bombs and stuff that you could do when you're actually shooting the things top down. That's kind of the concept that Nuclear Strike took. It just kind of took it in a 3D motion, like a 3D type motion, where you kind of turn it in like 360 degrees on the air and kind of bomb downward. Same concept. It's just with Nuclear Strike, they did it with helicopters versus games like R-Type, which did a side-scrolling 1942, did it like, you know, from bottom to top. So they did it in that form or fashion. So that's the game that I kind of think about it. And so it's kind of hard for me to even put it in that category to say that I would play it better than those games, because I would play those games before I would play Nuclear Strike. But I'm not mad at Lightskylar's choice. It's just personally, I probably would have chose something different as opposed to Nuclear Strike. But it's not a bad choice. Great arcade game. A great game on the console tip would have been better as an arcade game, that's for sure. But like I said, it's a fun game. I ain't gonna negate the fun. If you just basing it purely on fun factor, it was great. But graphically, it wasn't nothing special. Controls were pretty easy, fluid. It was okay. Sound was kind of average for its time. Like I said, graphically wasn't nothing special, but it was okay. I ain't like basically beating Lightskylar's head over it, but I ain't like digging it either. It's Nuclear Strike. What can I tell you? Is it fresh? Cool. Not mad at it for being in Lightskylar's top 5. True, but for me, it's Nuclear Strike, man. There's other arcade games that I would get down on. There's definitely better console games, even of its style, that I would get on too. So I'm not mad at you, Lightskylar. Definitely a good choice, though. I ain't mad at you. I know it's a fun game. So what it tells me about you is you like games that are very fun, a good mix of games. This is a military game, so I know that you kind of like those military-based games, and this is a very good choice when it comes to it. So shout out to you, Lightskylar. Definitely a solid choice. That's Nuclear Strike. On to the next one. Next on the bill, Battlefield 1942. Very interesting that he chose this game. Lightskylar, definitely a great choice, not mad at you. It's one of those interesting games, let alone interesting titles. Very, very great game in its own right, especially for its time, and the way that Battlefield kind of expanded on to do different things is definitely a good look. You know, one thing about Battlefield is it's that quintessential multiplayer game. You know, one of the games that you can actually do ground combat in first person. It also can support vehicle combat, so it was definitely dope. But it's definitely a multiplayer's game. You know, the single player campaign kind of solid for the most part, but it wasn't really anything special. Really, people really got down on Battlefield in particular for the multiplayer. And because the multiplayer was different than what you got in other multiplayer games at its time, you know, it was different in Call of Duty, different in Medal of Honor, different in a couple of other like multiplayer games that you had in this mix. Let me scratch Medal of Honor out of that. Different in Call of Duty and some other multiplayer games that was in its mix, where it actually kind of combined a few different elements. Really, when it comes down to is the vehicle and the ground combat. So it was definitely cool in that regard. But the one thing that I would take away from, you know, Battlefield in its entirety, and it's not necessarily in this particular game, it's just Battlefield in general, especially when it comes to DICE and how they've been holding things down for Battlefield as of late. You know, one thing I'm going to tell you about Battlefield is they're the one franchise who said, look, I'm going to take it upon myself to go against the juggernaut that is Call of Duty and do whatever I can to make sure we put a game that could at least be on the same conversation and on the same playing field as it. Now, I give them kudos and a lot of credit, and they got some gonads to really do those things and actually put it to the forefront and say, we're going to be that team that's actually going to go head up. There's very few companies who literally go head up against other companies and say, look, we're coming after this particular title, and we're going to do the best we can to give you a different experience than what you're getting here, and hopefully you're going to like it better. Now, ultimately, Do people still play Call of Duty way more than they play the Battlefield franchise? Yes. Call of Duty is still considered one of the top 2 or 3 top selling franchises of all time. So obviously people are buying it, and obviously people are playing it. But is it head and shoulders better than Battlefield? It's different. I ain't gonna say it's head and shoulders better. I think they do some things better in Call of Duty, but there's a lot of things that they do in Battlefield right, and they actually started implementing that in Battlefield 1942 as far as like the surroundings and the environment. They actually dialed that in really well, and actually when they started to implement it in later Battlefields with destructible environments and stuff, that's something that you really got a first taste of when you played Battlefield. The gunplay, being able to use the vehicle combat with the gunplay, that was something that was featured in Battlefield as well. They did a very good job in implementing that, not just in a single player point of view, but in a multiplayer point of view. But the other thing about Battlefield, what I really would tell you is that it does everything right, but it does it different enough. But the one thing that Battlefield didn't do, especially since coming off of 1942 and transitioning into like some of the more modern type games, it didn't transition well. It didn't transition into the modern type of shooters that you're getting right now. The one thing that Call of Duty did, and I'll give Call of Duty a lot of credit for, that it was able to transition from the old school World War II style to get more so to the new school kind of modern warfare type style that we're getting now. Battlefield had a hard time doing that, and I think that's the only real knock about Battlefield and this franchise. Like, if you kept it in the World War II era, it was going head up. I mean, you could put a game like 1942 and put it head up against World at War, and you'll be very hard pressed to really say which one of the two is really better from a structure and a gameplay and a style point of view, because they were very close and very good against each other. But the thing about the Battlefields beyond it is that it just took a while for it to kind of transition, and I don't even think that they really got it dialed in right, whereas Call of Duty just had better transitioning to the new school type shooters, and so that's what ultimately makes it better. But I like 1942. I definitely like the choice of Lightskylar made. I definitely thought it was a well thought out choice. It tells me that he likes military shooting games. He likes first person shooters for sure. He likes team combat games. This is all that you're featuring in 1942, so definitely not a bad choice. Definitely would be. I'm not surprised that it's not featured in other people's top 5, because Battlefield is definitely one of those sleeper shooter games that people really, if they haven't had the chance to play some of these old school shooting games, this is definitely not a bad choice at all. This one and Medal of Honor would be 2 games that I would tell you off top that you should definitely try to rock with. So shout out to Lightskylar for this particular choice. Battlefield 1942, definitely a great choice to be featured in the top 5. Let's go ahead and get into the next one. Man, when Lightskylar pulled this title out, Syphon Filter, I was like, man, that is a very interesting choice. Almost more interesting than 1942 when he pulled out the last one. But Syphon Filter, wow, that's an interesting choice. That's a forgotten game in the mix of great games that was in its time when it first came out. Syphon Filter is a sleeper hit. It was great on multiple platforms. It was a Sony exclusive, obviously, but it was great on the PSP, and it was great on the console as well. It was crazy because I think a lot of people's problem with Syphon Filter is they really just don't know about Syphon Filter. They really don't know how good this game really was and how really engaging this game is. I'll tell y'all the quick breakdown. When it comes to storyline, it had a fresh storyline. The storyline is really off the charts, let alone some of the gadgetry and the gunplay, because it has some of like the tripwire gadgets. It was like one of the first games you actually saw tripwires and people blowing up and stuff, and it was hilarious to see people like blow up or you get hit by a tripwire and blow up. This is one of the first games that actually showcased things of that magnitude. But the crazy thing about Syphon Filter, because it was only on the Sony consoles, like I said, a lot of people didn't play it, and the crazy thing about it is it was overshadowed. Now, it's a crazy thing about how Sony and their games, that they had a lot of games in their arsenal, a lot of them that they were exclusive. They wasn't on Xbox, they wasn't on Nintendo, they were really just on their platform. And Sony, for a good period of time, maximized a bunch of franchises. And Syphon Filter is one of those franchises for a period of time that it maximized to the fullest. They gave it push. I remember them showing it at E3. It was getting a lot of shine there. People just couldn't wrap their heads around it, because when you're a Nintendo player just starting off on Sony, or if you're an Xbox player, you're not going to know the first thing about Syphon Filter, except for you're going to know that it's kind of fresh. But the crazy thing about Syphon Filter is that as good of a game as it was overshadowed by two titles in the same style. Metal Gear Solid, of course, and Splinter Cell, of course. Now, when people think about stealth action, gadgety type games, they think of those two titles first. Because Metal Gear Solid is Metal Gear Solid, and Kojima and them boys is off the charts great. And the team that does Splinter Cell, what they had to do was look at a game like Syphon Filter and figure out how to become better than it. Because believe it or not, Syphon Filters for a period of time was on the heels of Metal Gear Solid. It was definitely for a period of time better than Splinter Cell for sure, no question. So Splinter Cell had to find a way in their team to make their story better, to make their gadgetry better, to make their gunplay better, to make it more engaging, so it can ultimately kind of weave out Syphon Filter. The thing about Syphon Filter, and it was a good problem to have, but Sony had to make a decision upon it, is that there's too many games of its style. And when you have too many games of the same style, certain games starts to get squeezed out. And you see this in gaming all the time. So it was interesting that Lightskylar brought this up, because it actually gets me to this particular point here. When you have multiple styles of games, there's always the juggernaut. There's always the couple of games that kind of sit in between, and then there's a couple of games that got squeezed out. Syphon Filter is one of those games that ultimately just got squeezed out simply because there was just not enough piece of the pie for the stealth action style of game that it was to actually keep itself relevant enough to compete. It ultimately just wasn't generating enough money. They wasn't getting like Metal Gear Solid money, and it wasn't doing enough to get like Splinter Cell money, simply because Splinter Cell was on multiple platforms on the Xbox as well as the PlayStation, whereas Syphon Filter was exclusive. It just wasn't generating enough money as an exclusive game to actually keep itself relevant, so they actually had to ultimately pull themselves off of it. But was it a great game? Absolutely. For a stealth action game, gadgets, storyline, absolutely. Syphon Filter, if you haven't had a chance to play it, definitely pick yourself up an old school PS1 or something, or if you got a hand on a PSP or a Vita or something, definitely get a chance to check this game out. It's definitely a great game and a great choice by Lightskylar. I like that game a lot. Definitely reminded me to go back to the crates and maybe try to pull that and play that for a period of time too. Lightskylar, great choice. Let's go ahead and get into the next one. Number 5, and certainly not least, Super Mario RPG. Lightskylar, interesting, great choice, not mad at you, but let me kind of break this down for y'all extremely fast. You know what they were trying to do? Square, Nintendo, they had a really great working relationship, as y'all well know, and before they kind of broke ties and went with Sony, they were really in the trenches trying to put together greatness. And what Nintendo really needed from Square, and the reason why they talked to Square to begin with, because with the Mario franchise, they locked it in to say, look, we are going to do something different with the Mario franchise. We want to give it a little bit different look and feel than the platforming that we've already established it to be the juggernaut of the game that it is. So they wanted to reinvent the wheel a little bit, tell a little bit of the story, get a little bit more about Mario and Bowser and Peach and some of the other characters, that is involved in the Super Mario franchise. That's what they were trying to accomplish here. And what they did was, pretty much worked fairly seamlessly to try to get that off. But even in, remembering some of the gameplay and stuff, and keep in mind, I'm not a big Nintendo dude, so for me to get gas just because it's Mario and Square, it is cool. Don't get it wrong. At the time, it was revolutionary in theory to a degree, but I don't think they executed it exactly right. And I'm going to get to that towards the tail end of this. But what they did with Super Mario was something. They were trying to convey the story and try to make the story more compelling. But it's funny, when you talk about Super Mario and an RPG, the last thing you talk about with Mario is the lore and the story. So if you're gonna do a game that is an RPG, the reason why you do an RPG from jump or do a story from jump is to make sure that the story is engaging. But the story in this, if you really broke it down, it wasn't all that engaging. To be honest with you, I'm not even gonna front. And this is not being a non-fanboy or anything. It just wasn't engaging to me. It was a very okay, plain, vanilla story versus what you were getting in other RPGs at the time. Keep in mind, you're dealing with Square. Some of the best pins in the game. They got some of the best pins in the game. Don't get it wrong in a second. They could pin together stories like nobody's business. But you couldn't pin together Mario? Out of all the stories you couldn't pin together? I don't know. It was hard because nobody ever talks about it. It's not one of those games that people are like, oh, you remember that Super Mario RPG? Remember the story elements of this and all that stuff? They don't talk about that. They talk about Mario from a platforming point of view or Mario from the Donkey Kong days. That's how you talk about Mario. You don't talk about Mario no other way. There's other games you talk about like that within the Nintendo franchise, and that would be Legend of Zelda. The one thing that you got more so out of, the platforming version of Mario was you got better story out of the platformers than you did out of the Super Mario RPG. So was it dope? Yeah, don't get it wrong. It was a dope merger, but it wasn't as fresh as everybody makes it out to be. It's fresh. It was revolutionary because Square put their imprint on it. But at the time, they did about as good as they could before they wanted to break ties and get away from it. For a basic, for a game, it was one of the things that they actually put together was it was the basic concept of the platformer, because they didn't want to lose the platforming element, but they wanted to have like the fluidity of story. You saw kind of the familiarity which you got with the Mario characters, and then you got the basicness to make it not overly complicated and kind of bridge those two together to make the game work. Basic concept. The game is not like structured as you see other RPGs structured. Very stat heavy, a lot of grind. So there's a little bit of grind to it, but it's not a lot of grind to it. It was very basic in his premise and very basic in his gameplay. And that was one of the things that Mario kind of bases itself on. Basics. And it bases itself on familiarity. The Mario characters. One of the things that one of the other people pointed out when they did their review of Super Mario was what made it special wasn't even the gameplay. It was the music. Facts. Because the very first thing that you think about when you think about Mario is the music in any Mario franchise. I'm not even mad at him about that. But I tell you why this game was super duper important. I'm going to tell you why, because it takes me to another franchise that's actually I deem better than it, and Square Enix had his hand on it, and that's Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts was kind of birthed in concept due to Super Mario RPG. But the difference is when Nintendo wanted to have their imprint on it and kind of do it kind of their way, kind of bridge the two together, when you just let certain teams just do what they do and get out of their way, watch out. And that's what Square did with Kingdom Hearts, and they were trying to give it to them for Mario, but they just couldn't relinquish the reins and let Square kind of do their thing. But look at what they did when they do their thing. They just generated a fantastic hit. Disney said, look, I'll give you the characters. Just do your thing, make it special, and we'll stay out of your way. That's what they did. They tried to do it for this game. Do you think if you just let Square just rock and just do the game that they wanted to do originally with this game, This game would have been the flagship title, not not Final Fantasy VII like everybody makes it out to be. It could have been Super Mario RPG, because guess what? The game that they had in the trenches at that time was Final Fantasy VII. So they were already pinning together greatness anyway. They just didn't get the greatness off the ground with Super Mario RPG. As great as of a game as it was, it could have been phenomenal. It could have been the RPG to go with. It's just a above average RPG for its time. But it's definitely not a bad choice by Lightskylar, at least it's not. But it's not top 10 either. It's not even top 10 and it's not even top 10 RPG of all time. It's maybe 11 or 12, maybe. But I could rattle off a couple of RPGs that's definitely better than it. I already talked to you about Kingdom Hearts. That's better than Super Mario RPG. Facts. Well, Fallout, that's better. Final Fantasy, that's better. I could rattle off franchises that's better, Lightskylar. Do I need to keep it going? But I don't know about Super Mario RPG. It's great, and I'm not saying that as a non-fanboy just because I don't roll with Nintendo like a lot of y'all do. I just don't think it was special. I think it was good in theory. I think they did some things right. I just think they did it better in franchises thereafter. But definitely not a bad choice by Lightskylar, man, nonetheless, man. I can rock with you on Super Mario RPG, man. Salute to you. There y'all got them, folks. Lightskylar's top 5. Y'all see him here. Nuclear Strike. Interesting choice. I see you, Lightskylar. Battlefield 1942. Okay. Like the first-person shooter aspect. Grand Theft Auto. That's the best all-around game of all time. Let's keep it 100. Syphon Filter, dug through the crates on that one, and it actually did a lot of things special, definitely worthy of top 5 billing. And Super Mario RPG, some people would deem it as the best RPG. Who knows? To me, that's a question mark. But I like the choices just the same. Y'all tell me what y'all think. Y'all like his titles? Y'all see something that y'all would change? Would y'all actually keep the titles? You holla at your boy, y'all let me know. Y'all know how we get down. Another top 5. Another top 5 breakdown. How did y'all like it? I hope y'all did. I'm glad to be back in the box doing this for y'all. Y'all let me know what y'all think. Y'all know who I am. My name is Mr. True Indeed, of course. You know who I represent. That's Holy Circle Gaming. Shout outs to them. You know how we do. It's always God above everything. And until the next time, family. Salute.